Welcome back, everybody, to You Can't Win. This is Tom here with Donald as usual, and you are on episode 19. Today we are going to be answering a bunch of different questions. We've got like a big backlog, and I thought it would be a good idea to get through some of those. So we wanted to start off with a question that Donald gets quite a bit about his writing and how he has come to be writing for the Harper's website. Yeah, maybe you can start us off, Donald.
Sure. So, yeah, I guess I still kind of think of myself as just writing short jokes, sending them out into the world, kind of not really. I don't know. I find it hard to transition into a business model. Like theoretically, I run a small business because I have to, I have to file all the taxes and do all that kind of stuff. And I do earn, over the course of a year, a few $1,000s from it now. But yeah, it is very kind of strange to me to feel like I have to take it seriously and kind of sit down and kind of work through all the details of that. So one of the things that I kind of think sometimes is that I'm kind of in the same lane or like same kind of like world as other people who are actually professional writers and stuff like really all the way. Like I feel like I have to kind of, I don't know. It feels strange because it's like I always feel like I'm at a very, very low level of it, the whole kind of like profession or whatever it is. And then I kind of have to think through what that means in terms of getting better at it and in terms of treating it less as just a complete joke and kind of doing it a bit more as an actual thing that might actually help me get through as a profession kind of thing. So, yeah. I think that one of the things that I found hard to do is, so writing like actual, like something that's longer than a few sentences, it's still very, very jarring for me. It's very kind of, so even in school, I would always think through things to the point where I kind of felt like I knew what I wanted to say. And usually just even thinking through, not even really doing a lot of good research a lot of the time, and then kind of throwing it onto the page, and then almost no editing after really other than that kind of initial kind of edit, just getting it out, getting it done, handing it in, and hoping for the best kind of thing. And I usually would, I would have to do it like last minute too, because I'd have to kind of get anxious enough to work through it. So it's been a very strange experience to get feedback on everything I write now, like with an editor at Harper's who has been really helpful in that kind of stuff, because it's completely new to me to get someone to say back, no, this isn't good enough. No, you don't have, you have to work on this, you have to work on that. That's completely new to me, because it's also something that doesn't really happen with Twitter. Like you can do 100 tweets and 90 of them will be pretty dumb, and then 9 of them will be okay, and then one will kind of hit with a certain audience or something, and then you don't really have that option in the same way for something that you're trying to get paid for a lot of the time, because if your editor is good, which is what you would hope for, they're gonna come back with a lot of feedback pretty quickly that tells you no, you just can't send something out into the world all the time. I mean, if it's not true of, I would say, most writing that actually gets put out, but it's true of if you're actually in a good situation with an editor, I think. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's such a you describing your writing process just making me cringe so much.
Oh, really?
It's the exact opposite of what I normally teach people to do. Like,
oh no, yeah.
Like what I try to get people to do is to write a lot and not to worry about what you're actually doing. Like I sometimes use the metaphor of like sculpting out of marble, but you have to create that block of marble yourself with words, and then after you have a big block, then you can start chiseling stuff away to get at what you're actually trying to say. So but first you just have to spew a bunch of stuff on the page, and once you sort of break the habit of being really fussy about what it actually says in the first place, and you just sort of write, then you feel comfortable like cutting like 30% of it and taking out huge chunks, just getting rid of whole ideas and everything, because it doesn't, you weren't invested in it in the first place. It was just, the process of outputting. And then you go through that editing, which really, that should be the majority of your, what you're really thinking hard about, the first thing should almost be just like blah, 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 stream of conscious.
Yeah. And it's funny because at some level I've always felt ashamed about that I always left it to the last minute. And so one of my goals for my master's was to rein that in and I spent a lot more time on writing and working through the ideas. And for a few things, I kind of did that, but most of the time, I still didn't. I still didn't, even on the final paper. I was rushing last minute to get something in, and it was not, I would be embarrassed if people read it. Now, I'm sure that, if I did read it, I'd be like, okay, this is not that bad or something, but it would, like, if I showed it to an academic, I would feel like pretty ashamed of that kind of stuff, just because. So it's very strange to then now I'm kind of pivoting to where now I'm trying to actually sit down and write at least the outline of like an actual kind of book that will have, like, it'll be mostly jokes, but still, you kind of have to hang the jokes on actual ideas, I think, to make something worthwhile to read. Mm-hmm. And then, so yeah, that's been kind of an interesting process, because I really have to kill that trend and focus on actually writing something worthwhile, I think.
Well, yeah, that'll be really interesting. I'm looking forward to that. I'm sure our listeners are as well.
Yeah, that, I think the writing is editing thing is true. Like, you're kind of, writing is rewriting is the kind of idea that you have to almost like struggle with it and kind of wrestle with, the different ideas that you're kind of trying to present. I think that's true. It's just that it's like a wrenching process for me to do that. Like, it feels like, yeah, I find that what I've been lucky to be able to do is put all of that kind of energy into like tweeting, like day to day. Like that was really what it ended up kind of, where I can do that wrestling over a very short sentence or whatever. Yeah. That kind of ends up kind of, so I think that's been a really good for me in certain ways of kind of training. It's almost like doing crossword puzzles for me or something like that, or like Sudoku or whatever it's called. Like that. That's how I look at it. Like, it's like a little bit of a logic puzzle for me to figure out what to write. And so yeah, I guess, yeah, it's actually kind of fun. Like I come up with like something, I don't know, like just a initial kind of idea, and then to kind of spin it out into something that actually is worth, to me, like being a joke or something, is really fun to me. I don't know. So I feel like it's like an analogous process to do that in a longer piece, but it's going to take a lot more work, because it's almost like it's a collection of those kind of puzzles in the way. So yeah.
That's sort of, I don't know, I guess I sort of do the same kind of thinking when I'm tweeting or when I was posting on stuff. But, I think your tweets tend to be a little bit more thought out than mine. Like, I'll have some thought, and then I'll just think of like, should I say it this way or that way? And then I post it based on whatever I think is funnier. But I feel generally that however I first think of it is just type it up and send it, and there it goes. I don't know. I don't really think of it too much as something that needs to be like touched up or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, even then, that's it's the same kind of thing for me, in the way that I'd only spend like a minute on it or something like that. But it's just that it's funny, because that is the level of attention and the level of like focus that I can kind of marshal most of the day. Like that kind of like being able to kind of like spend a few minutes to kind of like focus on something and work out the details, and then kind of send it off. I find that I have enough energy to do that, even if I'm like really, really tired and really like just basically like almost like a zombie otherwise.
Yeah.
And if someone tried to ask me something like complex, I probably wouldn't even be able to answer them. But I can kind of shoot off these jokes, especially because a lot of them are just basically reworking of ideas that I've thought a lot before. But it's kind of a funny thing that ended up being something that I could then leverage into being able to write more, because that was kind of a lucky thing. But yeah, I mean, eventually, you'd hope that I can take those skills that I've learned through joking around and then work kind of deliberately when I have the time and energy on something more substantial. So yeah.
I remember when I was younger, like when I was posting on something awful and stuff, like 10 years ago or whatever, thinking about, okay, so we spend like almost all day on these forums doing this, and we get good at it because it's something you do all the time, and you can kind of tell like some people are really funny, or they always have something interesting to say, or whatever. And you can just kind of see that how some people get really good, right?
Yeah.
And I remember thinking like, this is something that people enjoy, like it's something that people value to some extent, and people are spending a good part of their time almost like it's their job. And if people, I had heard this thing about like that people end up doing whatever they kind of spend their time doing. Like what you end up doing for a job is what you just are doing anyways, or what you find yourself doing and what you find yourself getting good at. And I was thinking like maybe that will happen with people posting, but there's no real, what job is that? That's not really creating anything serious.
Yeah.
But you're kind of doing it, man. You're kind of like
step by step. Yeah.
becoming a professional poster.
Sure. I mean, it's yeah. And so we'll see what happens with it. But yeah, I mean, the problem is that part of it is that I never wanted to monetize in the way that was kind of available for a long period of time, really. Like a lot of it to me, it seemed like the way to make money was to either do like kind of marketing kind of stuff that I was interested in, or I don't know. There's just a lot of ways that people tried to do it that didn't really make sense to me. Even with like memes, because I was doing that, I guess, for a few years before, I kind of wrote more just kind of straight kind of joke kind of stuff. I just did those in MS Paint. I even bought like a student copy of Photoshop for a while, and I couldn't do it. I just had to go back to just doing MS Paint, because I kind of almost had like a mental pact with myself that I only would spend a few minutes making any kind of meme and just kind of send it out into the world without actually, working on it. But it's funny because a lot of the big meme pages now even are pretty monetized. Like they do advertising, and they have, they'll get either books or even, I mean, there's even a new series coming out, I think, on Adult Swim or something that's just basically created by meme people kind of thing, So it's kind of funny that it's turned into its own little world where there are ways to do it. But yeah, so I mean, I'm also very self-destructive in a lot of that kind of stuff. Like I convince myself that bad self-talk kind of stuff. So I wouldn't really
self-sabotage.
Yeah, like I wouldn't normally approach anyone about this kind of stuff. Like I wouldn't, say to someone, I should be able to write for you, or I should, I could do something like that for you, whatever. So yeah, that was kind of a big thing too, is that all the people that so far that have offered me writing opportunities have come to me and asked me about it. So yeah.
Well, I got this patent for a meme vending machine that I think is going to do pretty good in Korea. That's where most of the interest for that seems to be.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Should we move on to another question? Just keep rolling with these things? Okay.
Yep.
As trolls who have been at this for a while, has there ever been a time when you've really regretted trolling someone? I can't think of a time that I felt bad about what I was doing. And I mean, I've said some pretty terrible things, but I feel like no one should really be taking anything I'm saying super personally. Like, I'm clearly just some guy online. It's not, and I'm a guy who does this all the time. Like, I'm always saying wild stuff. So I sort of feel like if you're ever, it's not like someone who's normally trying to be a normal person and then says something that's really cutting or whatever. I'm just always like going crazy or whatever, or I used to. I've kind of calmed down about these things. Yeah, I have never been in the position where I felt like I have gone too far and said something like totally unjustified that required like apologies. I have apologized for things when I felt like the other person took it really poorly, and I was like, okay, well, I don't think I did anything bad, but I do think that it would just be better if I apologize, and I think that would make them feel better. Like, I really don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. I just think sometimes people act ridiculous, and then I try to sort of mirror that back to them to sort of show them that they're being ridiculous, or to show other people who might take them seriously, like, look how ridiculous this is. That's really what my intentions are. There was one time that it's kind of the opposite of what this question is asking, but it was someone on the Something Awful forums who went nuts about some jokes I was making. I was sort of playing up like an anti-Semitic kind of almost like a character, and talking about how I forgot what it was. I think it was something like the AFL-CIO is a Zionist fifth column or something like
Yeah.
that. And so this person freaked out at me about how I joined the most extremist, violent religion in the world just so I can express my misogyny. And that's something that people have often said that kind of is doesn't seem to be related to me personally. That seems to be sort of like a go-to thing because it's Islam.
Yeah.
But they said something really funny. They said they were Jewish, and they said that you don't even have the body horror of pigs that I have, and then people started posting like pictures of little piglets at her and stuff.
Oh, man.
That was really funny. And apparently that post got reported to the ADL.
Oh, yeah.
Something awful got reported to the ADL there, and that's what she claimed. And I assume that the ADL gets lots of weird stuff like that all the time. But I was watching this Norman Finkelstein documentary, and they go to the ADL and they ask, like, well, how many anti-Semitic websites have you found this year? And they're like, oh, well, we have one. And I was like thinking that.
Yeah. They have like a video that they showed the president or something, like, they're posting pigs and stuff. Yeah. No. Yeah. So similar sort of thing for me, I think, is that I do regret it more when it's a one-on-one kind of thing, and I forgot to kind of rein in my troll urges. And I do think that's one way that people kind of, like I do at least sometimes, manage anxieties. That I find that, like, if I'm in a room and I feel like if I feel like other people are going to make fun of me, then I get really anxious about that kind of thing. But if I feel like someone else is there that is kind of acting stupid or something, then I feel less anxious because I'm like, oh, that person is the person that they're going to go after or something, right? Which is like just standard kind of bully thinking or something like that kind of thing. So sometimes I feel like I have that urge sometimes to go after people. I'm saying that, like, I'm just trying to be honest about it, not even saying that I actually want to do that, but I do have that kind of, I start to think, oh, maybe I'm kind of leaning into this and I don't mean to.
Yeah.
So I've gotten a lot of times where people will say what, they're saying to me, what you're saying is hurtful and you're meaning to say it that way or something. And I know there's been times when I've kind of gone too far with people, and yeah, that's the main thing, is like not being able to switch it off sometimes is pretty bad. And then, but on the timeline, I mean, the main thing I get, like on Twitter, the main thing I get from people, main complaint I get usually is that, well, I know what you're saying isn't true, but someone else might see it and it might get picked up by the news or something like that, and then it will feed into the disinformation and all that kind of stuff. I've gotten that a lot recently, and I don't feel bad about that, because I feel like that's almost like a chaos effect kind of thing, you know what I mean? Again, where it's like,
Yeah.
If that was going to be the thing that made the difference, then it's like things couldn't be helped anyways. So, yeah.
Yeah, if the news is going to start reporting on your memes as like actual news items, like, I think that's a problem with the news, not a problem with you making jokes.
Sure. But again, it's one of those, again, the chain of thinking things where they think because you made a joke about ICE, then in some indirect way it's like supporting ICE, so then you're causing people to be in camps and die or something. You know what I mean? It's kind of that kind of chain of causation in their mind where they can kind of dismiss you based on that. The other thing that I kind of feel bad about sometimes is that I make fun of people or things that I feel are like 90% good anyways, kind of thing, like Bernie Sanders or something. I spend a lot of time either saying things I do think are true about him that are just unfortunate or something, or making fun of stuff, and it's kind of like missing the big picture then, because it's like, why would I waste time on that instead of actually just criticizing things that are good and stuff? But I do have that kind of troll logic in my mind where it's like, no, it's the thing I have the impulse to criticize that I should criticize, not what is the right thing to do in some magical rational universe or something, like it's not like I should sit down and make a list of things that I think I should make fun of and then check off the ones. No, it's more going to ones that I have the impulse on, because that's usually the one where I feel like I shouldn't, and therefore it's usually good to kind of get it out of my system or something.
Yeah, that sort of idea of like prioritizing what you joke about. It's the
Yeah.
same to me. It's the same logic as that chaos effect thing that you were describing, where
Yeah.
it completely removes the humor out of.
Yeah.
Like in both cases, you're not being funny anymore. You're trying to make some serious point, but like doing it in a joke
Yeah.
instead of just telling the joke that comes to your mind. Because like what's funny is that it popped into your head. It doesn't matter if it's like a good thought or something. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
And honestly, even to think of you as someone who would go too far or whatever, I always think of you as like a very nice guy.
Okay. Yeah.
So when people act like you're being like mean or something, I'm like, that's so weird. Like I know I can be mean or I can be really crude. I will say stuff that you're really not supposed to say, but that's funny to do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's the joke.
Yeah.
Anyway.
There is kind of a logic though that you kind of start to think, I've got like 20,000 followers now, and some of them are real. Like most of them are bots, but like, like some of them are real, and you're kind of like, well, maybe I can kind of, you start to think like, well, maybe I can direct people towards things that I find good or positive and stuff, because I've got enough people that, sometimes it's cool to be able to bring light on things that I think are interesting or whatever, but then it really does, like that kind of thinking. I am kind of lucky that my followers are pretty spread out and kind of don't care about a lot of that stuff, because it kind of works against that then in my mind, because like if I retweet or talk about something about Canada, I get maybe like 5 people who care or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like I don't have to actually, do you know what I mean? Like even if I wanted to kind of get preachy about something, it doesn't really work because no one's here for that kind of thing. So it's just kind of it's good in that kind of way that because there's a lot of things I read on the Twitter that are more relevant to my actual existence kind of thing, like in the world, like in stuff, and not like just, the DSA or Bernie Sanders and that kind of stuff that I make a lot of jokes about. But it's just, there's no traction at all, no interest. So it's kind of, so that might actually be something funny that happens in the future too, is that in terms of job opportunities and stuff or whatever, is that, there might be stuff that I could do more focused on Canada that might be able to kind of give me an outlet for that kind of thing. But it's kind of funny that now, I don't know, like even just small things, like I get paid in US funds usually now, right? Like for things.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a funny, strange thing that I would not have expected years ago. And so I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like 90% of the listeners to this are in the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or even, I mean, we've looked at the stats and, we've got all over the place that people, a few people here and there.
It is interesting, the different countries that are not the United States, but the U.S. is like a huge portion of it.
Yeah.
Exactly. I do think it's interesting. You get 5 likes on your Canada-related tweets, and I got over 100 for saying "death to the leaf worshippers."
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it's not interest in Canada; it's so much like a rightful hatred of the place. I don't know.
Sure.
Something to think about.
Wow.
Okay. So this was from a while ago, but maybe you have some thoughts on this. What do you guys think of the Peterson versus Zizek debate? Did you watch that? I didn't even watch it.
No, I couldn't watch it. No, I just, I mean, it was pretty obviously like uneven, in terms of like Peterson's just some random guy to me. I don't know. He's like a psychology professor. I don't really, more about him than I do, really, I think. But he kind of seems like a strange kind of Jungian kind of guy to me. I don't really
his politics are really, it really is like if you just talk to some random person of his age and education level, that's just what it is. So like I guess he hadn't read any Marx, like he read the Communist Manifesto in preparation for the debate or something is what I heard, which is like, oh yeah, you bang through that one in an hour or something.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing to me for that kind of thing, so Zizek concedes basically 90% of it anyways, really, compared to the kind of thing that you would think Peterson is arguing against or something. Like Zizek is obviously going to say, well, communism as it existed was terrible, in a lot of ways, and
Yeah,
I mean, he's gonna have
he's
to.
always said that.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where it's good because it's the best version of that argument, really, for a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure.
But it's also, I can imagine a lot of other people that would have argued with Peterson that Peterson would have done a lot better against. I think so. It's one of those things,
Yeah. In a funny way, I think if he had gone up against someone who was more enthusiastically like red flag good,
Yeah,
I think that he would have come out looking a little better.
sure. And then and I also think that for Zizek, yeah, I mean, I don't know the point of that debate either. I'm not really sure. I guess it started people thinking, like people that are Peterson followers might have started to read a bit about Marx or something. I'm not sure.
I think that
outcome.
probably it did happen.
I find the whole debate culture, like the sit down debate, public kind of stuff, I find it very strange. Yeah,
Ben Shapiro style stuff, that whole thing. Yeah,
anything really, even like the Democratic presidential debates that are happening now and stuff is just all very, I don't know. I get it, but it's just it's not how I think about things, because I always think you should be quietly kind of reading by yourself, thinking through things or something, and not this kind of spectator kind of thing, So yeah.
On the Joe Rogan subreddit, they're always talking about, oh man, instead of these debates, they should just have these guys go on Joe Rogan, or Rogan should moderate these things, and everyone have like a long form conversation. I'm like, that would honestly be a lot better if like it was just Joe Rogan talking to each one of them, and then release like a series on his podcast.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard because a lot of these kind of things, and in terms of usefulness of actual public debate, I think a lot of the time what you're kind of doing is sorting through deal breakers, like because with politicians, just because a lot of the time like ideology can be just totally random in different ways, you kind of have to sort through people's opinions until you kind of reach ones that you're like, oh man, like you can have leftist people or whatever, or people who have good ideas about all different sorts of things, and then all of a sudden they have one that's like, well, also yes, we need to upgrade our nuclear weapons and like plan a first strike or something. Like things kind of come out of this wild, out of nowhere thing, and it's unfortunate because if you were talking to someone just normally, you would think, well, obviously they don't believe that, but then it just kind of comes out of nowhere, and then it can kind of dominate the conversation.
Yeah, a lot of these debates do sort of seem like tossing softballs and waiting for them to just strike out.
Yeah, and then so I think that's kind of a way that I think a lot of the far left tends to operate, where they kind of sort through and they kind of go through the 95% that they agree with quickly, and then they're like, yeah, but oh look, Bernie Sanders also supports the existence of Israel and all that kind of stuff. Like, so they find the reason why they don't have to support him, and then they kind of grip onto that and then say, that's the reason we shouldn't invest our whole thinking into it and stuff. Which is kind of a strange way to think about it, because to me, that's what I do. I do that kind of joke all the time, but it's strange because I think if you think of it in terms of percentages or just probability that Bernie Sanders is going to fix everything that you want fixed, it's not going to happen. Like, this never will. Anyone will, like any kind of, just as a stand-in for like a candidate that has relatively decent politics or something. No one's going to actually, as it politicians, I don't know. I have that kind of old, I'm not sure if it's like American or English kind of thinking of treating politicians as kind of almost like outcasts kind of thing, like where they're kind of people you should never really trust. Like you kind of have to send them off to the Capitol and kind of hope that they maybe do a few good things, but you don't treat them as kind of people that are going to fix everything. And I think if you got if you're skeptical, and if you weren't going to really put much of I think giving like some resources towards a political candidate, like if you're going to donate a bit of money or something, I think that's fine. But like dedicating all your time and effort and stuff to it, unless you're getting paid to do it, is just very, very strange to me. I don't know. Even when I used to do that, I thought it was. Yeah. I think that I eventually kind of reached the point where I was like, oh, that's So I think as a kind of like a portfolio of things that you're kind of interested in, it's fine to kind of be like, oh yeah, that's the best person of that bunch. and there's a small chance that things will get better because if they keep fighting that way or something, that's fine. But yeah, like turning it into a whole, either saying that they're the worst or they're the best. I guess that's kind of like just a standard online thing, though. People just polarize or something. So
Yeah. So the next question is, it seems like the concept of internet addiction has become obsolete in a lot of discourse. How do you guys feel about internet addiction, and are there drawbacks to the current concept of being online all the time? So I don't know if internet addiction as like a concept is obsolete exactly. I think I see a lot of people talking about it, and people are you hear stuff about like, oh, you got to unplug from your phone, or like now they have this stuff on your phone where you can see what your screen time is every day and all that kind of stuff. And so I think there is some awareness and actual action around trying to avoid that behavior. But I do think that it's true that if you went back like 5-10 years and looked at what people were saying about internet addiction and how they would define it, that most of the population would probably fit that definition today. We are online all the time. And yeah, I don't know. Do you think, what do you think about that, Donald?
Yeah, I think that part of it is just quality of the time that is spent. I think a lot of people just for their jobs have to be on the computer all day.
Yeah.
And for writing and those kind of, trying to tracking the discourse kind of stuff, a lot of people that we interact with at least are just part of the population that has to track that kind of thing, or at least convinces themselves they have to track what's going on all day.
Mm-hmm.
I find that it's more kind of the quality of what you're actually doing with the time. That's the problem to me. It seems like, although you have to compare it against other things. Like I always think, if you look at surveys of how much television old people are watching, it's like 30 hours a week or something like that as the average or something. It's just huge amounts of time that's comparable to the time that we might spend on Twitter or something, or at least or on different things like video games and all that kind of stuff combined. And that seems much more active. And I know that's kind of like the cliche, but it does feel more active than, and like educational in different ways than just watching like 7 hours of NCIS in a row or something, like it.
Yeah, where like 25% of it is commercials. And
so it's kind of, I think that's one way to think of it. But at the same time, comparing yourself to the average is not always good either. Like, it's like, what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
it's true.
If it's kind of a way of cheating yourself sometimes. And I find that the problem for me is that I should be spending a few hours a day writing or something, at the very least, if I want to have enough money to, be able to kind of live a middle class life or something in kind of a nice way or something by myself independently and all that. And it would be on paper very easy to do that. You know what I mean? Like it'd be very easy to pitch a lot more and kind of get out there and do more and travel more and do those kind of things. And then on paper that seems fine, but in reality I end up spending, whole days where I just don't feel like I have the focus or whatever to do the writing I need to be doing. And instead I'm just kind of, chatting online. And so it feels like interactive and it feels like I'm doing things and it feels like I'm whatever. But I always think like if I spent like an hour more a day, say reading about economics and finance or something, I might be able to do a lot more in that area or something. So yeah, stuff like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what's important is to maintain a internal perspective on what you're doing online. I think when it really gets problematic is when you're going to your phone or whatever just because you're bored, and you're bored because you just don't have anything going on. Like that's your go-to to kind of like make the day go away. And I also think if that's like your life, like when you start to think, like if you're having strong emotional reactions to like what people are saying online and stuff. I mean, it kind of goes back to the question earlier about me regretting things I've said or whatever. I feel like if you're at the point where you're getting upset about something some random person on the internet is saying who doesn't know you and is clearly just trying to like rally you up, you have an unhealthy relationship with
Yeah.
the internet, you know? Which isn't to like absolve myself of anything I've done wrong, but anyway, to get to the point here, I think what has been helpful for me is to never take anything on the internet super seriously. And I find things like daily prayer has been always helpful for maintaining like a balanced perspective on things. Just real life interaction, like prioritizing that over anything on the internet, and always sort of considering internet like something I do on my commute, when I'm sitting on the toilet, that kind of stuff, and nothing really more than that. Like I still feel, and I don't know if this is very common anymore, but I still feel ashamed to like pull my phone out if there's like other people around and like start looking at it. And I think that has definitely faded away a little bit. It used to be some big faux pas, and now it's pretty normal to just see a table full of people at a restaurant. They're all just looking at their phones.
No, I mean so we're kind of very different in some ways, because I find it like a central part of my day is checking in with people and seeing what's up, and kind of talking back and forth and kind of tracking what's going on and all that kind of stuff. I find that really good. Actually, I mean, I found it was strange because even when I was doing the masters, I found that was almost like the core part of my day. And then a lot of the actual kind of stuff around school and all that kind of stuff was it was stuff I had to do that was kind of structuring my time in some ways. But I still felt that most of the day what I was doing was just posting online or writing things and stuff. And,
You know what? I can actually relate to that. But I think what counts as checking up on people for me is like talking in like WhatsApp groups and stuff like that. And that to me like is sort of different. And I don't spend a huge amount of time doing that. Like I will just, the groups that I'm in are not super active. Maybe there's one that's fairly active, and that one I don't like read back or anything. I just kind of pop in and read it and say my thing while I have the 5 minutes that I'm there, and that's it. So and I do value that. Like a lot of the people that I consider my friends are just people I know online. So that is something that I think is important to me. And I don't know though. There's still a little bit of I'm still maintaining this idea of like what is my reality, and it's not anything that is really on the internet or something. I don't know. That's a little bit of like a bullshit thing to do though, because it's kind of not true. Like the internet is a real thing, but I think it's something of a throttle on keeping me from going crazy with it or something. I don't know. I have to think about that a little bit. All right, let's go on to the next question here. There was a common idea that media filled with violence and pornography would negatively affect people. It seems like this idea has mostly been pushed to the side in our society now. How do you guys feel about it?
I do. I honestly do think that it has a huge effect on how people see themselves and how they see their relationship to culture and stuff. I don't know. I've always been one of the people that actually really does believe that at like a statistical level or something, that video games and all that really does bend back and kind of create problems for relationships and kind of create problems for how people live their lives. And I think that the main kind of problem is that people say, well, the average person, number one, should be trusted to make those decisions themselves. I think that's fine. And then number two is so I'll just even focus on that, is that they try to turn it into a policy problem, because they're like, well, obviously the moral decision is up to the individual, and if there's no policy decision, then if the government's not going to say regulate violence and things or something, then there's no actual problem. Then they kind of think, like, they kind of say, I don't think that's true. I think that it really is.
I'm with you.
It really is one of those things where there's still it's because it becomes like a so what thing then, right? People go, well, if you can't point out what's illegal, then so what, right? And then it's kind of like, well, that's not true, because
Yeah.
you kind of have to think. I don't know. There's someone, I can't remember who, but someone said that like there really is a you are what you eat thing with a lot of cultural kind of stuff, where
Mm.
if you're focused on just a lot of sort of like violence and garbage and stuff, that it really does, at the very least, it's what you're spending your time on. You know what I mean? It's like that's what you
Mhm.
are focused on. But it's very easily, obviously, converted into either wanting the state to kind of control everything. People kind of focus on that, or they just focus on people who are obviously ridiculing them for dumb reasons or something like that kind of thing. Like they just kind of say, well, you're like a Puritan or something. It's not like, but I don't know. I feel like is a really overarching kind of debate that needs to be had of what kind of culture do you want to live in, or what kind of culture do you want to promote?
Yeah. That's what it comes down to me. I think in terms of the law, that people place way too much emphasis on, like they conflate legality with morality. Like something can be immoral and should still be legal because it may be worse for society for that thing to be
Sure.
criminalized or something. And just because something is legal doesn't mean that we should be cool with it. Like the age of consent is pretty low in a lot of
Yeah.
places, and that doesn't mean that we should try to convince ourselves that relationships of that nature are
Yeah.
okay, you know? So I sort of feel that this issue of media, it shouldn't really be like, well, whatever's legal, we should just sort of be cool with it. I think that there should be some sort of more sophisticated take on that we develop as a society, where we can understand like that violence and pornography are they're a negative influence on our culture, and it's not because, oh well, someone might break a law, like they might go out and murder someone or they might go rape
Yeah.
someone. I kind of think that is trying to force the issue to
Yeah.
be like someone feels in their gut that it's wrong, and so they're trying to find a way to like make it like a
Yeah.
legal issue when it's not. That's not really the
Sure.
problem. The arguments that a lot of like feminists and stuff make about objectifying women and all that kind of stuff, that's kind of closer
Sure.
to the sort of conversations that I think people should be having. But I also think that it's not really always so closely tied to the most immediate issue, like violence and pornography. Is maybe it's not exactly that it will make people more violent or it will make people more like sexually violent or
Yeah.
or problematic in some way. It might be that it will make people. It just has like a degrading effect on
Yeah.
us. Like it makes us more base. It makes us more kind of like an addict personality because we're being like bombarded with these types of messages and stuff. I don't know. I'm not the expert on any of these issues exactly, but I basically feel that this is something that we need a culture that is a little bit better equipped to deal with it, and we just have to build that. Like that's not something that just comes easy with like some policy or some law that will just enforce it for us. Yeah, I think we just lean too much on the law to solve problems when without really considering if that's the only tool available, or if that's the appropriate tool, or if the law will actually have the effects that we
Yeah.
want. People sort of just use it just willy nilly and kind of conflate their own morality with legality, and then go from
Yeah, and I
there.
think part of that does come down to something, maybe not religion in itself, but just this kind of feeling that people have that doing something that might be harmful in some minor, possibly minor way, or degrading or something like that, is just a natural part of life, that like life just involves patches where you're doing things that are degrading, or patches where you're doing things that are harmful, and that makes it either more fun, or that makes it a more human life in some ways. And I always
Yeah.
think of it in terms of the Vegas, like people say, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas kind of thing. I feel like, I don't know, Zizek has actually talked about similar kind of things, these things that are disavowed forming the basis of everyday life in different ways, and a kind of ideology where people think to
Hmm.
themselves, they might have a well-ordered kind of public persona in different ways, but then they do things that are forbidden in the general public as a way of saving part of themselves as being authentic. And it's like creating a hidden life as a way of reinforcing the fact that they're alive and vital and a good part of an order and stuff. And I think that actually is really important in certain kind of respects. Like it's obviously very, very central to things like the abuse crisis in the church or something. That's really a large part of, I think, the actual reality of how things go about is this way of kind of like public facing kind of goodness, and then privately thinking that you're part of like a subculture that is rebelling within that segment or something like that, and I mean, part of it, the way that it's attributed in kind of conservative media tends to be saying, well, it's gay priests or something like that too. But I think it's much wider than that. I think I really do think that's like a central part of the kind of way of thinking. And I think that's true for like pornography too and stuff, and that people feel like they have like a private kind of sex persona or something that is a outlet for them in different ways. And I think that part of the problem is that there's a tendency to believe that the public facing persona is always hypocritical. It's like the kind of like a belief in that central belief in America is that like the public persona is usually a hypocrite.
Right.
And when people are asked to kind of engage in more moral actions and stuff, they just see it as a super ego kind of just telling people to pretend to be good kind of thing and not actually be good. So I think that's part of the reasons why things like abuse in the church end up being like the church kind of thought of ways that it would be able to save its public persona because they thought that was like the central part of the goodness of it. So, yeah.
All right. I don't vote, and I think I'm overly proud or perhaps loudly principled about it. Do you guys vote? Is it defensible not to, on the grounds that the entire system is kind of a charade? Sprinkle some pacifism in there, too, at least with regard to U.S. forces. Thanks, I enjoy the show very much. I haven't voted since I voted for Obama the first time, and I felt so gross doing it. When I was in Washington State, which is like a very deeply blue state, and people were celebrating his win so much. And, I felt kind of weird about how bad I felt about it because, I thought it was good that like, okay, there's a black president. That's a great thing. And, and it was such a shift in mood and in tone from like the Bush years. Like that was all good. Like, but Obama I saw that stuff coming like a mile away that, and I think anyone who was paying attention, even the littlest bit did. But people didn't want to see that. It just gave me like a sick feeling to my stomach. And I was just like, okay, even if you vote for like the right choice or whatever, it's still putting a demon in office who is just going to do horrid shit. So I really don't see the point of it. I don't think there's any real moral value, positive or negative, to voting. I think that it's a non-issue, morally speaking. Do it if you want to. Don't do it if you don't want to.
So my take tends to be that I actually enjoy ticking the box. Like I like going in there, and I really fun.
There you go.
I think it's like a fun kind of thing. Like I almost always vote early at like the polling place where you can kind of. So in Canada it's different because most elections you don't have like a big ballot. You just have a very small ballot that has that one race on it, and there's not like a bunch of different elections. There's like maybe 3 different types of elections that happen: municipal, federal, provincial, and you only vote for one person in any of those usually, or something like that. Like it's basically it's very, very simple, and it's not like the United States where you vote for like district attorney and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff is appointed, basically. Anything like that is appointed. So I think there's part of that too, is that you don't really have to kind of obsess about it in the way that a lot of Americans do, where they're like, run my person for this or whatever, like they dog catcher. They don't have that in Canada. It's more kind of very simplified in that way. So it only happens really, like only once a year or so is there an election. And it's like a small, really, and it's also less money. It's gotten more money recently, but it's less money and less stakes than the United States in a lot of ways. So it's kind of easier to kind of not care that much, but kind of care enough that you can vote and stuff. So I don't know. I always look at it as actual voting and elections and that as being one of the few ways that you kind of have collective input to anything, other than, like I think like unions are the same way. It's kind of like this organization that you have some influence over your workplace, and in at least a theoretical way. And I almost vote out of like skepticism or something. I'm like, I might be wrong, so I might as well vote because it might matter or something. Like it's kind of. And I think that voting is actually a really small part of the actual political kind of process. There is a lot, like voting, it kind of sums it up in some ways. Yeah.
I think
so
that's true.
I like, from my experience and stuff and seeing how much money is involved in Canada, at least the stakes are so low, and there's like tax credits and stuff that, like, say if you wanted to, like, for an Ontario Social Democratic, kind of thing, like the NDP, if there's like a candidate that you like, their whole campaign in a major kind of seat or something, their whole campaign might cost them, like, say $80,000 or something, right? Like, it's not like a huge amount of money. If you donate $400 to them, you get $300 back on your taxes, even if you don't pay tax or anything. So it's, you can give $400 to a campaign that's already only spending like $80,000. You're actually making a significant effect on what they're doing. Like, they might be able to hire an extra person for another week or something, like it's like an actual chunk of money that will actually maybe raise a few hundred votes or something like that. So it's a bit more, once you start thinking in terms of that, I think when voting matters the most is when you're actually like in control of some sort of institution or something. Like if you're, say, like the leader of a union, then you can start to think strategically because you can kind of marshal your forces and all that kind of stuff. And there are a lot of people who are actually like that in different ways. Like they might have some sort of influence over thousands of people in their institutions or something, and actual budgets for things. Like they might be able to spend millions of dollars on things. In those cases, I think it's a lot more reasonable to think of yourself as an actual political player, because especially because it's actually pretty easy to get the government to do things in different ways, or at least to stop doing bad things sometimes, because the policy communities and all that are actually pretty small, and all the debates and stuff, politicians are very easily led different places. I think that's actually true, that like they don't, like, look at how actually easy it's been really in some respects for politicians in the United States to start talking more about Medicare for all and all that, compared to the actual, like,
yeah.
So I don't, but if you think of it in terms of percentages and tendencies, you can kind of look at that situation and say, okay, maybe it's not actually going to get the goal that you want, but it might help save the children's health program in one state or something like that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Which is still an enormous thing, really, like in terms of individual impact of like a small group of people being able to affect something. If you think about it, at the end of the day, it's actually an amazing thing. You actually can have that limited kind of impact in anything, really, and compared to, like, say, totally managed society or something. So I don't know. That's the kind of thing. I think once you kind of do it in a kind of a skeptical, kind of reversed engineered way or something, it's kind of, you can kind of say, well, it might be useful in some respects, but yeah. But I mean, in terms of individual votes, I don't even think that campaigns think that way. Like, I don't think any campaign, a national campaign anywhere, worries about individual votes, really. They worry about like busloads of votes, kind of thing. So
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, my takeaway from that, Donald, is that you like to vote. You like to check the box when there's only one race on the ballot. That was what I heard. All right. Next question. How ironic is Don's Maoism?
So it's one of those things where I had a point probably in 2007 or 2008 or so where I honestly came pretty close to completely believing it. Like, I came pretty close to being like, this is what I believe. This is an actual, it's like, I am this. This is what my, maybe not that exact word, but like pretty close to it. And I was like,
yeah I was there too, I think.
So the way that I look at it now more is that I understand that like there's a certain set of arguments that are easily deployed against kind of more reformist kind of stuff that explains why they'll probably fail most of the time. Doesn't explain why Maoism is better usually. Just kind of explains why,
Yeah.
It's not like, doesn't mean that outcome means that it's like, because it's like there's two parts to it. There's like a skepticism and like a strategy of change and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that the alternative policy or like strategy or whatever is going to actually produce the outcome that you want, because that would probably fail too. I always like people kind of say, well, the Cultural Revolution got the furthest or something like that kind of thing, and I always like think of it as almost like trying to jump between cliffs or something like that. And it's like, just because one got slightly further before falling down doesn't mean that it's doesn't mean that that's the one that's going to get you over the cliff kind of thing or something. You know what I mean? Like if you're trying to bridge a gap, then just because one got you a bit further doesn't mean you're going to actually survive that way. So
yeah, you still have to find out the jump that gets you all the way.
And I also think that there's sort of like a dissident Marxism that is common to a lot of different things, which people kind of gloss over or kind of pretend is like all one tradition. But I find that like almost any tradition, like Trotskyism or different types of far left communism and stuff, a lot of it is cultural kind of markers, and it's arguments about history but there is kind of like a strain of like, even anarchism gets pretty close of like sort of like a dissident Marxism, which made and a lot of the time it was just very, very obvious facts about society. Like maybe the actual claims or markers and stuff were very different in different cases, but it's stuff like, the Soviet Union was too bureaucratic. It's like, yeah, obviously. Like that's what they were saying about themselves. It's not even like that controversial to me. So, or like if democracy is going to improve, it's going to have to find ways of being more participatory and, less controlled from above by money or something like that, or the party or something. It's like, yeah, I think a lot of people can agree with that. It doesn't necessarily mean that, reading Trotsky's books is essential to find that out. But I mean, I always think that the same way about Marxism itself. Like, there's so much about Marxism that thinks of itself as like even just political parties. Like, I think that's a good example of like political parties and how parties work or something. So there's a lot of things that, like, say, Lenin said about parties, which would just be totally obvious to anyone involved in any political party. Like even maybe not as much in the United States, but like, say, if you're a member of, say, the Conservative Party in Britain, you would think, well, yes, we make these certain decisions this way. We have to give a public face to everyone that says we agree on these things. Like the theory behind it would be very, very similar, because that's just how those kind of things work. It's not like, so Lenin a lot of the time was just kind of making arguments he thought were pretty straightforward for why people should be acting like everyone knew they should be acting. Not like he wasn't coming up with new theories a lot of the time. He was just kind of saying that's just the way things work kind of thing, right? So yeah, it's actually kind of funny. Jacobin has been doing a long kind of series back and forth about the German Social Democrats and some of the problems and successes and stuff that they've kind of had. And it's kind of been an easy kind of way for people to criticize Jacobin, because they're kind of saying, well, and I kind of make fun of it sometimes, but it's just kind of, it's, they kind of say, well, Lenin rejected a lot of these things, but it is true that he bought into almost all of it otherwise, and kind of considered that kind of the basic kind of way that parties would operate in a lot of situations, and other than kind of more extreme revolutionary kind of situations or something. And it's kind of funny because you can kind of track who doesn't know what they're talking about in some ways, but people who kind of quickly react against it and are saying, no, that's not how a party works. That's not how that works, whatever. And only because the Soviets kind of had this kind of official kind of view that kind of criticized that kind of thing or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's completely just, it's people repeating things that weren't true even 100 years ago. So, yeah.
Yeah, just like the
Yeah.
talking points or
And
that kind
so.
of thing. Yeah, just to kind of refer back to the question of like ironic Maoism stuff, I think people have a hard time understanding that someone can like believe a certain thing or at least entertain the beliefs in something or think it's like a fairly compelling idea and also believe that they could be totally wrong about that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
You know, you know what I mean? And that I think comes across as being ironic or something when it's more like, well, this makes sense to me, but I'm also probably an idiot. So, you know, take that for what it is, but I'm still going to say what I think.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, at this point too, even it's kind of, people might find this kind of surprising, but it's like the debate changes and you change with it and stuff, and lots of different things kind of like, say, the United States, like the DSA, whatever, has become kind of a prominent force within its kind of subculture or whatever. And it's changed the definition of what, say, like democratic socialism or whatever. It's changed it so much from what it was in a few years that it's kind of like, why would I even bother pretending that it's not like positive in some respects, and all that. It's like it's responding to what, like, some of the traditional criticisms, and it might be still fundamentally incompatible with what I believe in other ways, but it's like, it's just, I don't know, it's just not, it's not worth fighting over those kind of things anymore. It's not like, say Maoism and those kind of lines and stuff. Like, it has almost no relevance to a lot of things that are happening now, because a lot of things that people are talking about within the democratic socialist movement in the United States are things that Maoists take for granted, are kind of coming back as common sense things, like talking about not focusing on elections all the time and more focusing on community organizing and kind of worrying about conflict with the state down the line and all those kind of things. They're just the mainstream debate now in a lot of left kind of publications and stuff. So it's kind of like, well, if that's where people are coming from now, sort of like siloing yourself off and pretending that you're some sort of extreme genius or something like that, it's just stupid. It's not gonna. There's no benefit to it. So you might as well admit that some people are listening and kind of changing what their beliefs are based on their debates and stuff. So
yeah, I think that phenomenon just shows you that like whatever is true is going to just sort of come out because it's true. Like if it weren't true, it wouldn't really have that force behind it. So in some ways, you don't need to be so worried about what people are saying at any given point in time. Like if you understand that things are moving in a certain direction, you can just sort of wait and it'll kind of work itself out almost. This question is interesting. It says, where do you guys get your ideas? So I don't know what ideas this is referring to. I've always thought of my ideas and my thoughts as something that I don't have any responsibility or control over, that they just appear in my head, and that if I voice them or send them out to the internet or something, it's not really my problem. It's like I didn't decide to have that idea, so it's not my problem if you hear it and don't like it or something. But they're probably talking about like ideas for a podcast or something.
No, I think they mean like our worldview and stuff.
Ideas about how the world works and stuff. No, I guess we've read a lot of books.
For me, it tends to be if someone smarter than me says something that I agree with, and I'm like, oh crap, I was wrong about that. Then when that happens, then I really, really take that seriously. And then I usually play around with it for a while, and then if it still holds up after a while, then I kind of take it in as kind of like a part of my worldview and stuff. And that's happened. That's exactly how I became more kind of left wing and that kind of stuff. And it's also how I became more religious, because it just 100% is it's almost always just me ventriloquizing whatever, like someone that is smarter than me or whatever, or like not smarter, but you know what I mean, like just insightful in that instance. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm doing that now, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, anything that Patrice O'Neill
Yeah.
or Imam Al-Ghazali or Adolf Reed has said, that's where my ideas come from. I just repeat what they have to say. Okay, how do you stop yourself from getting speeding tickets? Well, I don't drive a car, so that helps.
I don't drive either. I should though. My doctor today told me that I should drive. So
he said,
yeah. I said that I talked to the therapist about it, and she said I should. And I said if I did that one thing, it would solve like 5 other problems. And he's like, yeah, it would. He's like, it was kind of funny the way he said it because he's very reserved, and you get like a small little car and go around town. Just I don't know, just like he got like kind of he like got really kind of excited about the idea in his way, and was like, it'd be like great, just. And I was like, yeah, I should probably look into that stuff. But apparently, I shouldn't have been taught the way that I was or something. Like I went with a driving course, and the first time I ever drove, like ever, really ever, was like in the downtown of our little downtown. He was like, okay, let's drive around kind of thing. And I guess he didn't really know maybe that I hadn't done it at all. So I was just like driving around, and there's like cars all around me and stuff, and like I'm just like totally like no idea what's going on, just and then cackling and stuff, like just like because I just thought it was so funny that like I was like, I don't know, just not good. And so I'm just like driving around, and I don't know, I couldn't like put everything together at once. It was like a cognitive thing, like I couldn't put everything together. So he was like trying to get me to practice just playing around with the steering wheel and stuff, and I couldn't like take orders from him. I was just kind of like oppositional defiant disorder or something. Just like he was like, do this, and I was like, no, I'm not doing that or something. Kind of like just I don't know. So it was really funny. And then he like had me, but in retrospect, I like drove around like part of the town and stuff, and there's like cars around. I don't know. It just and so yeah, that was my therapist person that I saw just in a drop in, whatever. She's like, oh no, you need to like go out into the country and just grab it, like have like a car and just bounce around for a bit and just see what it's like, kind of thing, and just to play around, not worry about like following the rules yet, just learn how to actually move it around, kind of thing. So
yeah, heard that one before. That's what she said. Okay. That's probably good for now, I think. This might be a good question to end on. Who are your dream guests for your podcast? Would you ever want the guy who does Wint to come on your pod?
Oh, Drill,
yeah. I guess Tabs kind of knows him, so maybe, I don't know. I hear that he's a funny guy. His Twitter, honestly, for one of those huge accounts that that everyone knows, like he's pretty good. Like those things get pretty old pretty fast, but I think he's all right.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't know. It's funny because I always thought of it as just kind of a thing that you and I do together. I never really thought of it as until like recently. We just kind of, we've got like a bit of people listening to us and stuff, and kind of we've got kind of we've kind of worked through some of the basic kind of ideas that we were kind of interested in kind of talking about. Yeah. So it is kind of interesting now to think in terms of continuing on and seeing what kind of conversations we can have in the future. Actually, that's thing that people should just try to write in if they have ideas with different things they'd like to hear about different episodes and stuff. I think that would be helpful because we just kind of just been thinking through it, kind of the basic things that we knew we wanted to talk. Now we're kind of getting to the point where it's becoming more regular for us. Like we're committing to doing it a few times a week and stuff, and so it's gotten to the point where we kind of have to think of new series and new kind of things and new guests and stuff. So I think it's helpful for us to kind of work through that.
Yeah.
So,
And the thing with guests, my idea for guests, and I think Donald does share this idea. I was always a big fan of Opie and Anthony, and in particular the style of like how they would have kind of like a rotating cast of characters popping in the show. And so that's sort of how I envisioned our guests would always be. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know, like we'll just kind of see how it actually plays out and do what makes sense. But
Sure.
I sort of think about it as like our friends and like people
Sure.
who kind of reflect certain things about what we're about and that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I
No,
think that
yeah.
so far we've sort of done that. Like it
Sure.
hasn't been anyone like super famous or anything like that, and
Yeah.
it's just kind of been people we know that we like to talk to, and that's kind of how I'd like to keep it for the most part. And
Yeah.
if some of those people are like people who do have some visibility beyond just like being people we've talked to online or something, then great. But that's I don't know. Let us know what you guys think. If you have, there's someone who keeps popping up as being like, oh, you got to get this person on the show, then why not? We'll definitely consider it. I think we've had fun with all of our guests so far, so
Yeah. Cool.
Can't hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that seems about a good place to wrap up. Thanks for listening, guys, and keep sending those questions in. We got through I don't know, we didn't get through as many as maybe we were hoping to, but we got through some. Hit us up on Twitter at YouCan'tWinPod. The Curious Cat is up there, and join the Discord. If you are a subscriber, you should have access to that. And we will prioritize questions that are sent in through the Discord. And thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.